Over the last few years, there's been a trend among various YouTubers who create content aimed at patients with illnesses like Long Covid or with myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, in which those YouTubers make the claim that the only thing that's going wrong in these illnesses is a hypersensitive nervous system issue, a flight or fight problem, a maladaptive stress response, a limbic system dysfunction, all of these kinds of terms. And that there is actually nothing going wrong elsewhere in the body, no biomedical pathology occurring in the muscles or any other part of the body, the heart, organs, etc. In this video, I'm going to share with you 20 reasons drawn from the research into ME-CFS and Long Covid, which disprove this claim and which show that the nature of these illnesses does include many biomedical problems within the body. But first, if you are new to this channel, my name is Patrick Usher and I am an ME-CFS patient. And this is a place where I aim to present accessible, simplified explanations of the research into ME-CFS and Long Covid so that you can be more empowered in understanding your condition. It's also a place where I share the various treatments that I myself have tried in order to try and improve my condition. If that sounds good to you, please like and subscribe. First, I should make clear that I have nothing against using brain retraining as a way of improving from these conditions. Indeed, I myself make use of brain retraining and I have found it to be helpful up to a certain point. However, I do have a problem with those who simplify these conditions down to just being a nervous system issue, and for quite a few reasons. First of all, I really believe that patients with chronic illnesses, patients deserve access to accurate information about the condition from which they are suffering. It's a scary place to be when you don't understand why your body is acting the way it is. And the more that I have spent time researching what the experts are saying about Long Covid or ME-CFS, the less in the dark I have felt myself to be. And that is a far more empowering place from which you can then make more informed decisions for how to try to improve your health. Secondly, the nature of these sorts of illnesses is very complicated. Yes, there's a nervous system dysfunction, but there are so many other dysfunctions that are also going on, and some of them represent major physiological burdens. Now, some people do brain retraining and they recover, and that's great. Other people do brain retraining and they only make a little or more moderate progress, and then they can go no further. And that might be because there are secondary physiological burdens in their body that are stopping them from making further progress. That's why I believe it's very important to have a big picture view of all the different burdens that can occur in these kinds of illnesses. Once you have that sort of understanding, then you can try treatments that can improve specific problems, and then that might help you move forward and make progress in improving your quality of life, or perhaps even moving further towards recovery. I also believe that having an understanding of the main physiological burdens in illnesses like ME-CFS will be important for treatments in the future, because researchers are working on what kind of medications could help with various aspects of the pathophysiologies of these sorts of illnesses. I believe it's even feasible that in the future there may exist a pill that could reduce the physiological problems in the bodies of patients with these illnesses to such an extent that the body might decide that it's time to recover. In my own case, understanding the full range of physiological burdens that exist in illnesses such as these has been really important. There was one time when I suffered from certain problems so badly that I actually ended up in multiple life-threatening states. No amount of brain retraining could have helped me at that time. I needed a very physical treatment. After the list, I'm going to talk about some more reasons why I have problems with this idea that is put out there that these illnesses are only a hypersensitive nervous system issue. But now I want to get into the list, and I'm only going to go through each point very briefly. I'm not going to be talking about all the underpinnings of each point. I have other videos where I've done that, or videos that I plan to do in the future. This is only in brief, but please know that when I'm talking about all of these points, these are findings that are generally considered essential to the nature of ME-CFS and Long Covid. In other words, these are not separate physical problems, but problems that are considered part of the very nature of these sorts of illnesses. So the first reason why ME-CFS is not just a hypersensitive nervous system issue is, of course, low blood volume. This is a very typical problem within these conditions because the illness mechanisms actually create a situation where the patient goes short on blood. Now, one study actually found that ME-CFS patients who are housebound had at least 1 litre less blood than the physiological norm. And this kind of thing creates so many problems because the brain isn't getting enough blood to work with, the muscles aren't getting enough blood to work with, the heart isn't getting enough blood to work with. And so all of these things conspire to create things like brain fog and exercise intolerance. The second big reason is microclots. So this is where you have these tiny little clots that exist in the bloodstream. They are condensing the blood, they are making it thicker, and they are interfering with the transfer of oxygen from the bloodstream into the muscles, thereby creating exercise intolerance. Linked to this is reason number 3, which is something called endothelium damage, or damage to the lining of the blood vessels. This has also been found by the same researchers who've done the microclot research, and basically this will also interfere with the transfer of oxygen into the muscles because the damage in the blood vessels are to some extent also blocking the transfer of oxygen. And now, in moving on to reason number 4, we come to beta-1 autoantibodies. Now, autoantibodies are these little autoimmune substances which can have positive or negative effects on the body depending on the amount of them that someone has. But there are certain autoantibodies that have been found in ME-CFS research and which are considered to be characteristic of the illness. Beta-1 autoantibodies are an example of that, and they live primarily in the heart, and they cause problems with the heart's pumping capacity and therefore increase exercise intolerance as the heart cannot beat as effectively as would be ideal. Reason number 5 are alpha-1 autoantibodies. These autoantibodies live in the central blood vessels that are involved in blood flow return to the heart. And what they do is they prevent them from constricting, i.e. from tightening normally. So when you stand up normally, you want these blood vessels to constrict to allow for a smooth return of blood up to the heart. But in this case, because of these autoantibodies, the blood vessels are remaining too open and the heart has to work harder in order to work. And this again puts strain on the cardiovascular system and contributes to the exercise intolerance. Now we move to reason number 6, which are the beta-2 autoantibodies. Now these autoantibodies, in contrast, live in the blood vessels in the muscles. And what they do is they actually inhibit vasodilation of blood into the muscles. This is the opening up of the blood vessels. And when you're not able to open up the blood vessels that are situated in the muscles, then you are not able to perfuse the muscles with blood. And so when you try to exercise, the muscles actually give up really quickly because they're not receiving adequate oxygen and blood supply. And now we move on to reason number 7, and that is anti-muscarinic 3 autoantibodies. So these autoantibodies are very interesting for any patient who suffers from dryness, not being able to sweat, not being able to produce mucus, not being able to produce tears, because these autoantibodies actually inhibit all of those functions. And this is one of the reasons why ME-CFS patients often report that they feel very dry. Now we move on to reason number 8, which is something called heart preload failure. Now this is not to be confused with heart failure, it's a different phenomenon. And it was actually identified through the work of David Systrom at Harvard. And it is considered to be a unique cardiac pathology that exists only in ME-CFS patients and those with related illnesses. And what it means is that on the relaxation phase of the heartbeat, i.e. the point at which the blood is returning up towards the heart is not receiving adequate blood supply. And so it's a preload failure. You know, the heart is loading up with blood and then it's pumping it out. And so the actual loading up part is not sufficient. Now this is happening for various reasons, low blood volume, but also because of some of the other problems I've just mentioned that are all creating an issue with the return of blood to the heart, as well as other things besides. So now we move to reason number 9, a minor ischemia reperfusion injury. Now this comes from the wonderful research of Carmen Scheibenbogen and Klaus Wirth. But the idea is that within ME-CFS, there is a minor version of what is known as an ischemia reperfusion injury. Now normally what this means is that a part of the body might actually be cut off temporarily from blood supply for some reason, like a clot, for example. And then when the blood supply returns, there's a reperfusion of blood. But because that part of the body has been deprived of the blood and the oxygen, when it then gets reperfused with blood, it actually really struggles with that, and so it creates a kind of injury. Now, what this research actually proposes is that this phenomenon is going on, but at a more minor level within ME-CFS patients. So, for example, when a patient crashes, they might actually experience this more minor ischemia reperfusion injury in various muscle groups and so on, as the blood supply temporarily worsens during a crash. Now we move on to reason number 10, low nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a gas which improves vasodilation, the actual opening up of blood vessels, and we know from the research that ME-CFS patients are often low in nitric oxide and therefore again not able to perfuse blood adequately into different parts of the body. This brings us to the very similar reason number 11. ME-CFS patients and long COVID patients are often short on carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide, far from being a waste gas, is actually also very important for the perfusion of blood or the seeping of blood into different parts of the body. Why? Because carbon dioxide is a vasodilating gas. That means it opens up the blood vessels, it warms the body, and it improves circulation. Again, in ME-CFS patients, this gas tends to be low, further increasing the problems with blood perfusion into the muscles and into the brain. We now come to reason number 12, and a really important point within the cellular issues that happen in ME-CFS, so the problems actually going on right down at the level of the cells. And there's something called the sodium-potassium pump, which sits on the cell wall, and it is charged with the task of ensuring that within the cell there's the right amount of sodium and the right amount of potassium. And what's been observed in ME-CFS is that the function of this pump is going slow, and this has widespread implications for bodily processes. And this brings us indeed onto reason number 13, high intracellular sodium. When the sodium-potassium pump is slowing down, it's then unable to ensure that the appropriate physiological balance of sodium and potassium remains in the cell. Normally, we want more potassium in the cell than sodium, but because the pump is slowing down, there starts to develop a buildup of sodium inside the cell, and this leads to weakness, difficulty contracting muscles, difficulty really just having energy into the muscles. And indeed, some researchers have actually suggested that high intracellular sodium is a pretty good biomarker for ME-CFS. Now we move on to reason number 14. If you have high intracellular sodium, a very likely additional problem that will develop is high intracellular calcium. So when the normal mechanisms that ensure the proper transport of sodium and potassium break down, so too does the capacity of the body to remove calcium from the cell. And so you start to get a buildup of calcium. And when you have a buildup of calcium, this can cause muscle pain and additional fatigue. So all of these cellular issues have also been identified as central to the nature of ME-CFS. And so it's no surprise in moving on now to reason number 15 that research has also found that the muscle fibers of patients with long COVID, with ME-CFS, can actually become damaged when someone crashes. And in fact, not just that the muscle fibers can become damaged, but they can actually, the fibers can actually become necrotic, which means that they actually die and then they have to be regenerated. So we know that this illness is actually capable of causing damage to the muscles themselves. Now we move on to reason number 16, and moving away from cellular and muscular issues, but we also know that there can exist a range of spinal problems in ME-CFS. It's very common for people to have things like craniosacral instability, but more typically, people will have problems in the thoracic region. That's the region in between the shoulder blades. It often develops a certain rigidity and pain, and this can actually cause problems with circulation in the brain, as well as the removal of toxins via the lymphatic system from the brain. And very interestingly, there was a study which was actually able, with considerable accuracy, to diagnose ME-CFS patients simply by observing changes in their posture and spine. And now this leads us to reason number 17. A lot of ME-CFS patients have problems with collagen synthesis, that is, creating collagen within the skin. And so they tend to end up with very stretchy skin. It's a problem that I have myself. And It's unclear why this happens. It could be because of a concurrent triggering of the genetic problem Ehlers-Danlos, which is very common in ME-CFS, or it could be a problem that's more to do with the body not prioritizing collagen production while you're sick. Perhaps it's something that might return if one recovers, although there's no data on that. This is a very obvious reason of a biomedical abnormality, and in and of itself, it will mean that the blood vessels are not as supported because tight skin supports the blood vessels, and this in and of itself can further contribute to exercise intolerance. Now we move on to reason number 18, which is problems in tryptophan metabolism. Now, tryptophan is used in the creation of serotonin, and what the work of Ron Davis at Stanford has shown is that the pathways by which the body normally creates and utilizes tryptophan are actually dysregulated and leading to a lower production of serotonin, which leads us on to reason number 19, which is indeed that the bodies of patients with long COVID and ME-CFS have been found to have lower levels of serotonin, most likely because of what Ron Davis has found with tryptophan metabolism. And finally, to reason number 20, adrenal shrinkage. Yes, you heard that right. It is actually possible that ME-CFS patients experience reduced adrenal gland size by up to 50%. And this can happen because of various neurological dysregulations which act as a stimulus for growth for the adrenal glands, but basically over time the adrenal glands can shrink and then they start producing less adrenal hormones, and this leads to a vicious cycle, particularly with all the functions that so depend upon adrenal gland capacity, such as stress tolerance and the regulation of salt. So there you have it. There are 20 reasons based on the research into ME-CFS and long COVID which show that this illness is anything but just a hypersensitive nervous system issue. And I really want you to reflect on how all of the problems that I've just mentioned, or at least most of them, could in fact themselves create a hypersensitive nervous system. Let's say you have low blood volume, or you have problems with microclots, or the problems with the blood vessels opening up to provide blood into the muscles or brain. Are these things not going to stress out the brain? If your brain isn't getting enough blood, it's going to be stressed because it requires blood and oxygen in order to work. And so when these people are saying the only problem is a maladaptive stress response, they are completely ignoring that actually the very biomedical nature of ME-CFS will probably be stressing out the nervous system anyway. So everything is working in every direction. Another thing I've noticed when I've raised these points with those who push the narrative that the only problem in ME-CFS is this nervous system issue is they respond saying, yeah, sure, by all means, go and test for physical problems, make sure you rule everything out, and if you find none of these things, then yeah, it's just a hypersensitive nervous system issue. I mean, there's so many problems with that response, it's hard actually to know where to begin. But the first is, these findings are very recent and they're not going to be known about by most doctors, and there's not going to be tests that are easily accessible for ME-CFS patients. So someone might have some of the problems I've talked about today, they might have all of the problems I've talked about today, but when they go to their doctor, they do not have access to tests that can confirm or deny the presence of these issues. And this is simply a problem with the medical system because it hasn't caught up yet. The second reason I have an issue with that kind of response is that it's almost saying that all of these kinds of issues are somehow separate to the very nature of ME-CFS, as if you're talking about, whether someone has low B12 or low iron or, a broken leg. It's as if they're irrelevant to ME-CFS really, whereas actually all the things I've talked about, and my other videos will go into more detail as to why, but all of those things are actually essential to the nature of ME-CFS. They're caused by the core mechanisms within ME-CFS. They're not separate problems. And so it's a kind of sneaky sleight of hand to respond in that sort of way. And I just think in general that not to take these things into consideration, it's disrespectful of researchers who are really trying to work to uncover the devastating nature of this condition. And it also is disrespectful to patients, particularly if you're running a program and charging a lot of money for people to access it, in which you are actually presenting them with information that is blatantly false. As I said earlier, patients deserve to know what's actually going on in their illness, and simplified answers do no one any favors. There's been so many times now that I've seen people talking about recovery stories, and that's great. I don't deny that people can't recover using brain retraining, they can. But some people, they're saying things like, I was so relieved when I knew that there was nothing actually wrong with my body. And that's quite concerning to see people say that, particularly when you consider that there might be someone in the comments who's watching that video and they actually do have some of the reasons, some of the pathological things I've talked about in this video, and they might really need a treatment for one of those in order to move forward. And now they're being told this narrative, and so they're not actually going to look around for that treatment. And indeed, this whole narrative feeds into a very troubling history with ME-CFS, in which patients have been told the problem is all in their heads, there's nothing else going on, there's nothing wrong in their bodies, they're just afraid of exercising. Although the framework is different between the kind of medical professionals who pushed that crap on patients and those in the YouTube sphere who push this narrative, it's very concerning that both actually essentially suggest that at some level the brain is afraid of exercising. I mean, this is horrendous, really, if you think about it. You've heard all these different factors I've described, which actually, offer a very robust explanation for the exercise intolerance in these conditions. And patients are being told that the only issue is that their nervous system is so sensitive to exercise that when they try to exercise, their nervous system freaks out and stops them from doing so. I find that very irresponsible. And so, as a final point, if someone says that ME-CFS is just a hypersensitive nervous system issue, this is blatantly untrue. It's ignoring all the things I've talked about today that are essential characteristics of ME-CFS. It's also ignoring the almost 10,000 papers into ME-CFS at this point, as well as the thousands more that have been done in long COVID, and so many of those papers have identified biomedical problems within ME-CFS. And if you take away all of those biomedical issues, and you are indeed just left with someone who has only a hypersensitive nervous system problem, well, then you're not talking about ME-CFS anymore. You're talking about something else. It's really important that patients have an accurate understanding of their condition. Yes, there is dysautonomia. Yes, there is a maladaptive stress response. But there are so many other things going on, and so many of those other things are also feeding back into the maladaptive stress response. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. I know this is a controversial topic, so please do leave your candid thoughts below. You'll also find a medical hypothesis, a free download that I wrote in relation to thirst for ME-CFS and long COVID in the information box, as well as details about the consultation service that I offer if you want to talk about these or other issues in more detail with me. That's it for today, and I'll see you next time.